Now for global business updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Bassi. Good morning, Ayo, Rufai.
Good morning,
Fantastic show yesterday. Thank you.
I saw that you were doing a rap thing.
Yeah, just had to be a little creative with our take on monetary policy. So you guys should definitely watch that. Thank you so much. We begin with oil market. The oil was up slightly Thursday trading. You've got 73.64 for Brent. West Texas about $70.16. Natural gas down. The promise of China stimulus, we had that announcement yesterday from the Chinese government looking to, boost stimulus, hopefully, which would stimulate demand in the second largest economy of the world. So traders are optimistic on that. Also, we're going to be getting U.S. Crude inventories tomorrow. There is a forecast that they've actually dropped. So there's an inverse relationship between the two. If U.S. crude stockpiles are dropping, that is the inventory that they have, it suggests that there's possibly higher demand for oil there, and so that would support prices. If the inventories increase, that means that they are storing more oil, which means there's less supply. But remember yesterday during the Christmas special, we talked about domestic travel in the U.S. for the Christmas period and how AAA has anticipated that there would be an increase in travelers. Almost 90% of the 119.3 million travelers go by road. So, lots of road trips in the U.S. So that'll probably be the reason why you will see crude inventories dropping in the U.S. We'll see what happens when those numbers come out. Bitcoin, where's Bitcoin? I can't remember, 98, I think, or 97, 98. That's, again, over the last 20 years, it's still very, very volatile in these past few days. So, that is the story with Bitcoin. It's always volatility. And we'll see how things proceed as the days go by and folks return for the holidays. The markets are, mostly closed with respect to, if we go to the Asian markets now, the New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, they're all closed. So we swapped out the Hang Seng for the Nifty 50, which is an index in India. Shanghai Composite in China up by 18 basis points. Again, that same stimulus promise story is probably what was feeding, but the trading was pretty much very thin. Kospi is still down though, and is the worst performing index in the markets up until trading, if you take it up to right before Christmas. So the Nifty in India up by 13 basis points, Nikkei 225 in Japan. Both Honda and Nissan stocks are up about 5% and 4% respectively this morning. They've announced that MOU. They are working on that merger. So that's what you're seeing supporting stocks over in Japan for the Nikkei 225, which I think is top 5 best performing indexes so far this year. From there we go. I focus so much on Asia this year. Singapore manufacturing output. Again, Singapore, big economy, one of the most active ports because of its strategic position, huge in semiconductors, huge in electronics. So their manufacturing output is an index that is very much followed in Singapore because of what they're manufacturing. It has a very diversified, very innovative, very healthy manufacturing sector. So 8.5% year on year, although it did come in under forecast. So the forecasters, I think a Reuters poll, they're looking at 10% growth year on year for Singapore's manufacturing output. Seasonally adjusted, it did contract in November month on month by 0.4%. The forecast was for 0.8%, but by and large, this is the fourth, I think, or fifth consecutive month of growth in Singapore's manufacturing sector. And when Rufai, Dr. Abati, Ayo, everybody talks about boosting manufacturing in Nigeria, you can see the importance to an economy like Singapore. To Japan, I think part of the reason why even the Nikkei was up today, in addition to Honda and Toyota, is that there's a draft budget that was seen by Reuters that suggests that Japan is preparing a huge budget for 2025, 735 billion. We talk here about our own budget. Think about that. $735 billion is what they're looking at. In yuan, that's about 115.5 trillion. This fiscal year was 112. They're looking at tax revenue of almost $500 billion because, again, as the yen has weakened this year, Japan is an export-oriented country. I just talked about Honda. I just talked about Nissan on the Nikkei 225. And so that has helped corporate profits. Those corporate profits, just to link this to the wage discussions that Governor Ueda, we talked about yesterday, those corporate profits are the reason why union workers in Japan want higher salaries, because companies are doing well. So the government is also saying, well, we're looking to target higher tax revenues from those corporates. And then bond issuances is going. You know that Japan has a very high debt to GDP. You know, Rufai has talked a lot about Nigeria's bond issuances here and Nigeria's high interest payments. So Japan is facing the same thing. They got one of the highest debt to GDPs in the world. But of course, a lot of that is domesticated, which is in their own currency. That's why it's not that much of a worry, but it is still a worry. So this is the first time in 17 years that Japan's planned bond issuances will be below 30 trillion yen. So they're looking to trim that down a little bit. From there, I think we'll go to Nigeria now. Big news from Access Bank. Just to remind everyone, we talked about this way back in March. Just to remind everyone, those CBN new requirements for the Nigerian banks, depending on where you are, your international authorization, national, regional. So the tier 1 banks like an Access Bank is up there for the international. 500 billion, of course, the new minimum capital requirement. Access has, of course, they've not only met it, they've exceeded it. So they did put out that announcement yesterday. If you look at Access Bank's beating that threshold, they announced yesterday, of course, that, I think it was even the day before yesterday, that they've received the regulatory approvals for the rights issue, which of course requires not only regulatory approval from the CBN, since it's under that purview for a bank, but also the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And they've essentially, the rights issue of 351 billion, they've met that target. So that share capital taking them to about 600 billion is 100 billion over the threshold. So they're the first bank to hit that, and we'll see what happens with the rest of the banks. Their stock price, I think, is up, what, about 4 or 5% so far this year. It closed up right before the Christmas Eve. So that's our updates for this Boxing Day.
We are not boxing.
No boxing, sorry, boxing like
boxing.
presents. Yeah.
See,
nice. This tree is beautiful.
Beautiful.
I have to say.
Beautiful.
All right.
So,
okay, yeah.
So as I was saying, you know, when you were saying really the numbers, 500 billion for international bank, I was just looking how terrible times have become for Nigeria. At a point, the banks were scrambling to get just 25 billion.
I remember that. Those were back when,
Those were back in the day. I think it's now 500 billion, you know. I mean, it shows a lot of the devaluation. It shows a lot of mismanagement in this economy. It shows the state of play of things. You know, it's really gone down. But kudos to Access Bank. Wherever Herbert Wigwe is today,
he rests in peace.
He will rest in
proud.
peace. He'll turn his grave because these guys, the likes of Roosevelt and the likes, have kept the legacy intact and they've kept it strong. I mean, the first bank to reach that threshold. I think other banks too should be able to come in strong.
Yeah, they will.
And some of the things. But also, one part I want us to talk about is the outlook for businesses next year. Rotus is not looking good. Even we in the media, we're going to take a big beating.
Yeah.
Because most of our FMCGs that advertise with us might be closing. Number one, the inventory issue.
Yeah.
Number two, you're going to a new year with a lot of uncertainties. The government needs to be able to cushion the effect. You are looking at Japan. Look at the big, huge tax numbers that they're collecting. $500 billion.
It's
even more than that,
Rotus. Crazy. Yeah.
It's 8.8 trillion yen on top of the number. So it's about 546 billion, thereabout, for a budget of that size. But if you go and investigate, you also see what the government of Japan does for those businesses. The Zaibatsus of this world, the government supported them. In Korea, they have the Sheibos. The Zaibatsus of this world, they were small companies too that became big-time companies in Japan, and the government supported them. Look at the deal with Nissan, Mitsubishi, you know, coming in strong. That's another deal. These were indigenous Japanese companies. What do our own government do? So if our government wants to get big taxes, like they're getting in Japan at this point in time, they too should support businesses. When you support businesses, they can do a whole lot more. Not by stifling them and all of that. That's it. Did government pay for low salaries in times of crisis when we had COVID? I mean, these are the questions we should ask. And Singapore is just another reminder of what Nigeria could have been. See, in the 70s, this Singapore had nothing. Do you know Lee Kuan Yew came to Nigeria and he wrote a book from Third World to First World about the way Nigerian politicians were behaving then. He actually wanted to see the British Prime Minister then, Harold Wilson. So he came to Nigeria. There was a conference, I think it was a Commonwealth conference. He came here. He understudied our politicians. The things he said about our politicians then are still what they are doing today. Yeah. That's why the country has not moved forward. But guess what? He worked in tandem with another guy called Dr. Weissmans, and they were able to build Singapore into a hub of production today.
Singapore is incredible.
While Nigeria is still wallowing.
Well, I'm more optimistic than usual for 2025 for Nigeria. I think things will stabilize. Like the exchange rate one, we'll see. But I think cautiously optimistic.
Rotus, I want it to happen.
Yeah.
for me, my first prayer will be inflation. At least if you can drive, I'm not going the line of
15%,
president.
yeah, I don't know about that
at
one,
least
but
for me,
right.
what I will call, if you can drive that at least down to like 26, 27%, I'm okay with that.
Hopefully.
Not 15, at least 26, 27%. We'll know okay.
First of all, congratulations to Access Bank. Like you said, they've gone beyond the 500 billion share capital that they were supposed to have requirement for a bank that operates internationally, and done 600 billion with a very successful digital rights issue.
Yeah.
So on many fronts, they've demonstrated, as an organization, as a pace setter in amongst others. And this again is a testament to organization corporates who have done well against all odds in the Nigerian economic climate and business environment. So great one to them. Like you said, we're looking forward to other banks following suit. It shouldn't be, we're not going to celebrate isolation. We want as many of them as possible to thrive. But of course, Access Bank leads this and hopefully is an inspiration to others. But I want to actually touch on a story. You didn't take it, but Daily Trust has it.
Yep.
And it's because it's something that you often talk about and we discuss, which is telcos may hike call data tariffs early next year. Don't smile.
No, but Ayo, you and me we're always going. Okay, well, go ahead.
I understand. I mean, they've often the big telcos have often lobbied that they've not seen investment in that sector because the tariff is not cost reflective.
That's right.
Now, what they're saying, and an interview with the Minister for Digital Economy and Dr. Boston Tijani had said that there might be a need to hike prices. So we're looking at perhaps in the first quarter, a 40% hike in tariffs in telephone calls, data, and all associated services that they give.
Right.
This is good news for them because, I mean, earlier this year, it had been announced that MTN had billions of losses, recorded billions of losses in the first half of this year. Yeah. Same with Airtel Africa.
Thank you. I was about to mention Airtel.
Yes, Airtel Africa as well. So it's good for them, but Rotus, if they are going to, people have to pay reflective tariff, but if they are going to increase or hike the rate, can they give good services? The reason I'm saying this is because a lot of people have complained of horrendous services this Christmas period by these telcos. Yes, so. Is there any regulation oversight or any kind of fine or penalty when they don't give the services they're supposed to? Personally, I haven't had service for like 2 days. Right. And this is, you haven't had service. Internet. Terrible. Right. And they'll say it's fiber, they'll tell you it's 5G, but it's not. So when they lie or falsely advertise, and that's why I'm saying maybe if they give cost-reflective tariffs, can they actually give the people good service? And by the way, none of the telcos are exempted. So it's not as if, one or two. All of them. A small surge in the number of people, especially during the December period, it's chaos. Yeah. It breaks down. You cannot use. In fact, they do rationing. One household will have today. So I would love to. In fact, I'm going to report to the FCCPC. Yeah. I'm serious because it's really bad. People are paying. The fees aren't cheap in some instances, but you're not giving the services. So can they have the infrastructure once they're able to hike their prices finally? Can they give people what it is that they pay for and stop lying?
So the thing is, they're not lying. See, the way we frame these things, I always come out as if I have to defend the businesses, right? But here's the thing. You have to, look, Ayo, you talk a lot about doing business in Nigeria and the high costs. These telcos have been operating in an environment where they have not been allowed to raise prices. So that, of course, caps their profits. And out of the profits, out of your net profits, what do? You either reinvest in dividends or you're going to allocate something to what's your capital expenditure. Capital expenditure is the way you expand infrastructure and deliver better service. But if you don't make enough profits because tariffs are capped, you cannot increase your capital expenditure.
I'm waiting for them to increase tariffs. Let's see how it will affect the service.
And another thing that was important, these base stations run on diesel. With the power outages and the challenges they have been facing, it has been really, really tough. So we have to cut them some slack because of the business environment. But good point. You're a champion. I said Minister of Tourism. Maybe you'd be FCCP. Yes, go ahead, Doctor. Go ahead.
Let me start with Asia.
Yeah.
Yesterday, we talked about the BOJ governor, Bank of Japan governor, Kazuo Ueda, and we said, well, he has taken a dovish approach, a cautious approach. That same yesterday, he made a statement that the objective of the Bank of Japan is to ensure in the year 2025 sustainable, economic framework that will achieve the 2% inflation rate. Yes. The other thing he said is that there will be wage increases on account of that. Now, these are two issues, apart from the concerns that he has expressed about what the global outlook will be for 2025. The effect of that is that had a corresponding effect on Japan stocks. The stocks immediately responded. Now, the Nikkei 225 increased 0.44%. The Topix increased 0.49%. And then there was greater enthusiasm. Even the bond yield, the 10-year bond yield increased. So, Japan is the big story out of Asia. The markets were mixed, as you pointed out, in Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere. The markets are closed today. But the major story today is Singapore manufacturing data. And that's supposed to come on, later in the day. The other big story that I found out there is NVIDIA. NVIDIA retail investors are putting in about $30 billion into NVIDIA. NVIDIA, the mega cap stock in artificial intelligence in the year 2024, increasing ninefold since 2021. This year, you could say, effectively, is the year of NVIDIA, where artificial intelligence is involved. It looks like all the routes lead to NVIDIA. And this, the performance of the technology sector is, responsible for how, the technology sector has done very well, either on the Wall Street or on the Main Street.
Indeed.
With NVIDIA overtaking Tesla and similar companies and dominating. Now, the other issue will be in England, Cadbury losing its royal warrant after 170 years. That company was granted a royal warrant in 1854 by Queen Victoria, but now it has lost that particular warrant. It's not alone. Unilever is also part of it. Mendelez has also lost his royal warrant. King Charles III, responding to protests, since early this year, that any company that has businesses in Russia should be denied the royal warrant.
Indeed.
The royal warrant is simply some kind of royal, endorsement. But to go back to Asia, you also mentioned Honda and Nissan.
Yes.
Now, last week, earlier this week, they began their merger talks.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting in the Honda-Nissan talk is Carlos Ghosn. Carlos Ghosn, former, CEO of Nissan, and who was, for 19 years in charge of that, unity, togetherness between Honda, Nissan, Renault, and Mitsubishi.
Yes.
Those were the three companies that came together. He says that Nissan is going to be a victim of a carnage because, that partnership, that merger that they are looking at is not going to be to the advantage of Nissan. Nissan already is talking about laying off about 9,000 members of staff. Yep. And he is saying that this collaboration, that there's no complementarity at the heart of this merger that they are talking about. But what is certain in that merger is that the Honda Nissan, they are saying Mitsubishi can join in February, is supposed to make that merger under a new name, the third largest automaker, after Japan's Toyota and Germany's Volkswagen. Over 54 billion, are being proposed as merger. So this for me are the big stories. As for Nigeria, nobody is certain about what the outlook will be because everything, the line between assumptions and presumptions are blurred.
Indeed.
And I think the presumptions are much clearer in this particular regard.
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.